The player in the slot obeys Cubell. We'll get it back. The shot, Morin, they score! They score! Morin fires! And if it's his first NHL goal to give the Flyers a 2-1 lead. How about that?
Well, what a great moment for Sam Morin. You see the reaction of his teammates. That was awesome. He gets the shot through. Michael Raffl buying time, allowing O&B Puckcast to get in on it. And the shot from Morin. And the smiles from his teammates. Just absolutely awesome moment for Sam, who's been an outstanding player in this game. There's Raffl. There's the turnover by Rooney, and O&B Puckcast quickly gets it to the point. Sam Morin snaps it home right there. Look at that reaction. Gostisbehere into his arms. Huge goal for the Flyers and a big moment for Sam Morin.
Hey everybody, it's Isaiah, and I'm here with Chef B, who's going to tell us about one of our sponsors here. Chef?
Yeah, O&B Puckcast is now brought to you by Summit Public Adjusters. The winter months can be especially hard on our homes, from roof damage and peeling siding to frozen pipes and toilet overflows. Call Summit Public Adjusters before you call your insurance company. Dealing with your insurance company can be stressful and confusing. Let Summit Public Adjusters take the stress out of the claim process by having our guys work for you. Get the most for your money and your repairs. The next time the big snow or the rain leaves you with some home damage, contact us for a free consultation. Summit Public Adjusters are licensed in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Learn more at summitpublicadjusters.com or call 215-752-0560. Just tell them that the chef sent you.
Yeah, what was that number again, Chef?
215-752-0560.
That's terrific. All right, we're going to carry on with the rest of our show. Hey, everybody, it is Isaiah. We are back, the O&B Puckcast, episode number 142. Flyers. Well, they've lost 3 in a row since we last spoke to you, and I guess we're going to have to back off and take that 30,000-foot view with everything. But just a reminder, we're brought to you by the FlyersNittyGritty.com, and of course, also brought to you by Jim South Street, Jim Steaks, 40 years of the finest cheesesteaks and hoagies in the grandest Philadelphia tradition, right down at 400 South Street, of course. And if you live down by there, by all means, check them out. But if you can't, don't worry. They have DoorDash they work with, and they'll get that delicious food right to your door. So check it out. The best cheesesteaks you're going to get anywhere. Definitely got to be on your bucket list. Jim South Street. 400 South Street in Philadelphia, PA. And, of course, we're back here. We got a full panel. Chef is off from sick bay. I just want to remind everybody that the O&B Puckcast can be followed on Twitter at O&B Puck, at O&B Puck. We have a Facebook page, YouTube channel. Just plug O&B Puckcast in there. We'll come right up. And if you could follow and subscribe, whatever applies to your favorite podcast platform or YouTube or what have you. We're also having an account on Getter as well, just to give us options. We'll never know what happens with that. Just want to broaden our coverage. But if you subscribe and give us a rating and things like that, it moves us up the charts for people who are looking at Philadelphia Flyer podcast. So with that, gents, let's introduce our panel. Chef B, you are back from sick bay, man. How are you?
Feeling much, much better, but not feeling much, much better about our Flyers.
No. Well, before we move on about that, just introducing, of course, always with us, the great Dan Silver. How are you, man?
Hey guys, I'm doing good. It's rolling into 2022. We'll see what happens.
Rolling along. And I don't think last year, I guess because Chef, last show I should say, was here. We didn't say Happy New Year to everybody, and we have so much ground to cover. The Flyers have, let's put it this way, they've lost 3 games since we last spoke, but they are in 21 games, they are 5-11-5 since they beat Calgary at home in overtime on November 16th. They are out of a playoff spot with, let me see here, 33 points, haven't played 35 games. They are 5 points behind the Bruins, who have 4 games in hand. And if you're looking at points percentage, because, we don't know if we're going to be able to get all these rescheduled games in, the Flyers are among the last of all the teams in the Eastern Conference at a 471 points percentage compared to Boston, which is up at 613. And even Detroit and Columbus are at 500. So, Chef, let's just get your overall impressions over the last 2 weeks since we didn't get to hear from you.
Let's just say disappointing, but also, too, I'm frustrated. I know what it's like to feel the COVID sting now. And with this team going through all these different protocols and all that, all the frustrations in and out. I mean, what was it? The Phantoms played the Penguins. Is that what it was? It seemed like it,
Yeah.
So it's very frustrating because to me, I kind of wanted to see what this team would look like if they field the whole team. And we haven't even seen that yet. And that's a sad part. That all the moves that we all agreed that all the moves that were made were pretty decent ones at the beginning of the season, and yet we haven't seen all those moves play together. So the greatest thing is frustrating. And the games, they're boring. They've been boring too. I have to say. I mean, kind of flicking back and forth. You want a game to hold you.
Chef, we're going in and out with you. You might want to maybe reconnect and try that because we're losing you a little bit. So while Chef is getting that together, why don't we go to you, Dan, and kind of piggyback on Chef's comments?
There's not much more to say other than it's just like rock bottom, right? I mean, there's really nothing that's overly positive about this team right now. They're playing without a lot of their top players. Claude Giroux in COVID protocol. Or he has been. Sean Couturier's out. Kevin Hayes is playing with some kind of injury. Ryan Ellis is injured. The teams that they're putting out there are they're borderline AHL level teams, and then you combine that with the fact that this team just has no confidence whatsoever, and it's not pretty to watch, and it's kind of sad to watch. The Penguins game, the first period, they just they got completely dominated, and they're down 3-1 or 3-0 after the first period. And then they come out and they play okay in the second period, get a goal back. But the Penguins are just too good. And they end up winning 6-2 against the Sharks, who, when they played in San Jose, Felix Sandstrom played very well. He made a franchise high saves for a debut goaltender. It was like 42 or 43. And then they come back and they give up 47 shots against the Sharks in their most recent game. I mean, they're just not really putting an NHL product out there right now. And it's depressing. I mean, we'll get into a little bit later on, I'm sure, of what we think they should do and where they should go. But there's even the guys they have in there's just not much compete right now, which kind of Mike Yeo talked about. And, even if you don't have the talent level, some of the teams you're playing against, the compete level needs to be a little higher. It's just a morose, depressing feeling around this team and franchise right now.
Yeah. I mean, the cultural thing has been a recurring one for quite some time. Either they come out like a house of fire in the beginning of this year and they slump in the second period. But for the most part, they've kind of returned. This is something I was going back and forth with Anthony Sanfilippo. We was talking about whoever scores the first goal and stuff like that. But for me, it's like they're already past that. They're getting to a point where they don't show up. Whether they score or not seems to be a product of luck. And if you look at the chances and, who's driving the play, it seems inevitable the Flyers are going to lose. And then they'll show up in the third period with a rally too little too late, or they show that lack of spine versus the Penguins and the game just gets away from them, Chef.
Yeah. uninspired is what I would say. It would feel like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm looking at this team, and what I see is, well, the next man up thing isn't working. That hasn't worked. And it's like, well, this guy isn't trying, so why should I? And that's kind of what I see. And then you get these little flickers because it's the younger kids. Let's face it, it's the younger kids that have been the only bright spots. I mean, York had a very consistent game the other night, two games actually, and then Farabee has been kind of solid. So it's more like the younger players, you're getting that contribution from them. It's Kevin Hayes has been almost invisible when he's been in. JVR is streaky at best anymore. So it's generally totally inconsistent from all sides. But the only bright spots you're looking at are these young kids, and they're they're few and far between.
Yeah, you know what? I want to kind of hone in on something here before we get back into some of the more broader analysis. I want to take a look at the offseason and take a look and break down these moves that were made, right? And then I think of July, and I had something in here from Chris Turian that they need to be in a rebuild. And what I felt that they went through a significant retool in the offseason, right? And I even forgot about Thompson. I didn't even mention him, although I don't think of him really anymore, even as part of this team. But, you look at the moves of bringing in Ryan Ellis, Ristolainen, Atkinson, Jones, Brassard, Yandel, Brown, McEwen, and then trading. And what have the other guys done elsewhere? Myers, Patrick, Haig. Jake got his 1,000th game, but I would make that trade over again. Anytime. Ghost is playing well for Arizona because nobody really cares, and Elliott is doing what he does in front of one of the best three teams in the league in Tampa Bay. So Dan, if you think back, where someone like Bundy says it doesn't matter, these might be nice moves collectively, but this team needs to rebuild, and he's saying that last July, and here we are. It looks like he's right.
Yeah, you brought up the Bundy tweet. That's exactly what I was going to bring up. Chris Turian tweeted that out. And this goes back to sort of the way that I've been defending Chuck Fletcher on the show and on Twitter. If you look at all the moves that Chuck Fletcher made, by and large, they were all pretty net positive moves, right? The only one that's really been bad to this point, besides Yandel, and again, they signed him for $800,000. Is the Ryan Ellis trade, only because Ellis has been injured. But the guys that we moved in that trade have done nothing. And you can't blame Chuck Fletcher that Ryan Ellis has been injured as much as he has. But aside from that, yeah, all the moves have been net positives. And the team's not talented enough. And then you compound that with all of the injuries that they've had. The one thing that Chuck Fletcher didn't have the gunpowder to go after in the offseason was a second line center / third line center, if you're going to put Couturier as the 1C and then Hayes as the 2C or 3C. And then, of course, Hayes gets injured. So what are you going to do about that? He's still playing with an injury, and now Couturier's out. I don't hold Chuck Fletcher responsible really for this. I think he's had 2 out of 3 pretty good off seasons, and they're just not talented enough. And a lot of it has to do with, again, the injuries and also some of the young kids like Travis Konechny and Ivan Provorov that have just not progressed as we would have hoped.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think part of the issue is, and I've been listening to a lot of other pundits and what they say, but for me, it's a lack of top-tier talent. And I don't know if it was Charlie O'Connor or Meltzer or even our Jamie Basco, just a nice piece, State of the Flyers at FlyersNittyGritty.com. And there's no stoppers on this team. There's nobody other teams have to game plan for. There's no big shot or area of the ice that you have to worry about. There's no excitement that comes on the ice like a McKinnon or anything like that. And I think when you're in that situation, it's such a lunch pail effort, Chef, that it just screams out the Flyers are not fun to watch. But beyond that, don't seem capable of making things happen except in these 5-man units, and they can't seem to take control of the puck, keep control, get sustained pressure, and when they lose the puck, they just can't seem to get it back, and it's lather, rinse, repeat.
Well, and the most troubling thing is you talked about how other teams have other players. We have nothing in the pipeline. We have no heir apparent to, our greatest asset in Giroux. And, we all talk about how he has been elite, but he's not. Is he that one guy that everybody, like you said, that other teams scare for? No, he's not. Not anymore. He might have been 6 years ago. He might have been somebody to worry about. But then again, 6-7 years ago, we had other people on the ice that you needed to watch out too. So it made him even more of a threat. So this is going to be their biggest problem, because when we talked about all these years about how they drafted and how all these assets that over the years that Hextall accumulated. But, what we didn't realize, or maybe we realized too late, maybe I did, was that all these players are basically varying degrees of the same player. If you think about it, it's like they all have, the prototypical, like, draft pick from Hexie during that time when he whiffed was like, okay, plays, smart with the puck, good eyesight, on the ice and all these different things. But it was just varying degrees whether he was, how good they thought he was going to be. But it was essentially the same player all through those years. So I think, and now we're hitting the wall basically because there's nothing really. After you get past a couple of guys in the minors, there's really nothing really to get excited about down there either, is there?
No, I mean, they didn't tend to swing for the fences. A lot of people have been bringing up Sanheim versus Pasternak, and that's an easy one. I mean, I went Aho versus Konechny, but, the whole league passed on Aho. But listen, if we hit on one of those, it's a different story. But I think the Flyers center ice play, Dan, is just something when you're going to have Hayes at less than top speed. Couturier, whether we knew going into the season he was going to have some type of injury, he was battling something that was, really gnawing at him. And they didn't really have a third-line center to begin with. Hence the argument in the past that I've made, we're trying to get a guy like Reinhart as opposed to Risto, but then Risto was kind of half insurance for getting Ellis. So it's trying to put all these pieces together. At the end of the day, it's still a lunch pail effort. And that's the only way they're going to win. And the one shot they really had to get an impact player, and maybe two if you want to count 2015 when they chose Provorov, and there was so much talent, high-end talent in that draft. It was with Nolan Patrick and, what happened and what played out in 17. But other than that, they just haven't drafted high enough and had realistic opportunity to draft high enough. And it begs the question, like, where do you go from here? What do you do?
Well, what's upsetting, before I answer that, is you mentioned the Sanheim-Pasternak thing. And I don't remember if we talked about this on the show last week or if it happened subsequent to the show last week. But, I tweeted out last week about how, Ron Hextall's scouts had wanted to take either Miro Heiskanen or Cale Makar, and Hextall had overruled them to take Nolan Patrick, which I've gotten from now two very good sources. And the next morning, I woke up to a tweet from a nationally renowned scout who's got a very good network of people in the NHL and scouting circles. And he direct messaged me and he said, hey, just so you're aware, in 2014, Ron Hextall's scouts wanted him to take David Pasternak instead of Travis Sanheim. And Hextall overruled them and took Sanheim instead. And he basically said to me that more than almost any other GM, Hextall has a track record for, overruling the opinions of his scouts. And it cost the Flyers a lot. Imagine if we had Cale Makar or Heiskanen and Pasternak instead of Nolan Patrick and Travis Sanheim. And that's nothing against Travis Sanheim. He's had a fine NHL career. I think taking him where he was taken he's probably about average or even better than most guys that are taken at that point. He's become a pretty good NHL D-man, but the scouts wanted him to take Pasternak. So which leads into the fact that with this team, what you mentioned, what this team does not have, which is the big problem, is they do not have a game-breaking talent like a McKinnon or a McDavid. And the way that you get that typically is by picking in the top 5, top 3 in the NHL draft. And so for me, the hard truth is that the place that you need to try and go with this team is you need to try and sell off the assets this year, like Claude Giroux and Ristolainen, any guys that are on expiring contracts, see what you can get, and then give the kids a shot, like Cam York and Zamula, and try and see if you can get top 5 picks this year, or maybe next year. The 2023 draft is supposed to be one of the best in a long, long time. Now, it does seem like they say that a lot of times when we're like a year and a half out from a draft, but that's what they're saying right now. So I'd be trying to stockpile first-round picks, second-round picks in 2023, and you really want to try and do a rebuild. I mean, I just don't see with what they have now them getting to become a cup contender. The problem is that we're locked into some of these contracts. Like Sean Couturier's got a new 8-year contract kicking in next year, and Kevin Hayes has got 4 years left on his deal. Ryan Ellis has got 5 years left on his deal. So these make it a little difficult to try and do a real rebuild. But for me, that's the path you've got to take. You got to try and get some high draft picks so that you might have a shot at landing, a Shane Wright or a Matthew Savoie this year, and a Connor Bedard or a Matvei Mishkov next year, who are supposed to be generational talents. So that's the path I would be taking.
Well, generational is, that's a tough word. I mean, generational, I think of Lemieux, Gretzky, Crosby, Ovi, Malkin, maybe. So are those guys really in that category? If you use that criteria, maybe elite.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's hard to tell because we're this far out. But it's the one thing, those guys don't have the size, right? Bedard's 5'9", Mishkov is 5'10", but from a skill standpoint, they're supposed to be incredible. So they're probably not, a generational in the sense of a McDavid, or even a McKinnon. But maybe you're looking at like who knows, a Jack Hughes or a Fedorov, at least something where you're able to have a centerpiece around which to rebuild, which they do not have right now.
Yeah.
No, I agree with that because, I like Tyson Forster. I think he's going to be a good player if he heals up and he's not, he's not addled by the shoulder problem he had. And most kids that young are going to heal just fine. But I have to agree, they just don't have a real blue chipper, someone who looks like they're going to be an all-star or a superstar who's going to, bring everybody out of their seats. It's just the Flyers haven't had a player like that in so long, really. And, I think of Lindros, I think when even Forsberg, when he came and he wasn't quite the guy he had been in Colorado, he was still a hell of a player. I mean, in that playoff series, I mean, it was unbelievable the way he could hang on to the puck. I mean, just an elite skill level player, and they were able to get by with the Carter Richards kind of player as probably their best guys. And then you had complementary players who were really probably as good at what they did in Gagne and Briere. So that was fun. These were really compelling offensive stars. But Chef, since we're getting into this, and we're going to get into the cultural thing next, because to me, having one without the other, it's still not going to work. But if you look at each player, let's just go to the top of the leaderboard. I mean, the Flyers' top scorer right now is Claude Giroux. He's 34. He's coming up at the end of a deal. Well, why don't we do a stays or goes? I'll give you 5 players, and then Dan, I'll move to you. In terms of, would you be willing to move them? Well, here's a better question, because we could be here all night with that. But maybe it would be better to say which players, if we're going to if maybe not completely tear it down to the studs, okay, but which players do you think from either a practical standpoint or your own in your own analysis, should stay here and be part of what's going to happen going forward? Like Cam Atkinson, I think he's a good mentor in terms of how he carries himself. He's got the kind of contract a lot of teams aren't going to want anyway, even though he's had a really good year and has been totally as advertised. I think if you look at him, he might be someone I want to go move forward with, and Carter Hart. But beyond that, who are some of the pieces that you kind of want to move forward with as what the new Flyers are going to be? Chef, I'll start with you, and Dan, give us a couple names and we'll bandy that about.
Okay. I guess we'd go with Cam York. I would go with Farabee. I would go because I think Farabee, I just touch on this very briefly. I think Farabee has really made himself very valuable to this team in the power play. I mean, a penalty kill and scoring, and he's just been overall. So I definitely Farabee. I would say York, and that's a tough one now. After that, once you get past that, I mean, I have liked the way Ristolainen's played. If we could figure out something like there, maybe, because we don't have anybody else that's even close to his physicality. So, but I guess that's my short list right there. That's sad, isn't it?
Yeah, it's sad in one way, but it reflects what's been going on over the last decade, and especially, 3 out of the last 4 years that this thing continues down the toilet. Dan, and any comments on what Chef came up with, and maybe some additions or subtractions?
It is sad, right? Like that you're asking us who we want to move forward with, and we're coming up with just a few guys. And I agree with Chef. I mean, from a forward standpoint, it's tough. I like what Cam Atkinson has brought. So I'm just looking down the roster. I'd keep him. Joel Farabee, right?
It's tough.
You got to keep Couturier. I would move. I think I'm ready to move on from Konechny. Konechny's an interesting one because he's just shown so much promise, and I do think that he's been harder hit by sort of like personal issues and over the last few years, and I think he's going to rebound, right? But it depends on what you could get for him. Like if moving him could net you, first round pick and a really good young prospect.
Bye.
I think you've got to look at it. From the defensive standpoint, the really interesting thing was Elliot Friedman last week mentioned that not only that he thought Claude Giroux was going to get moved, but he mentioned that Ivan Provorov, he thought they might want to try and move on from him, which surprised a lot of Flyers fans. And the thing with Provorov is he hasn't really lived up to the potential, but he is a top pairing defenseman. I mean, you can rely on him to play 28 minutes a night, and he doesn't get injured. But for whatever reason, he kind of hasn't taken that next step in his career. I think you really would need to get a king's ransom for Provorov. He's on a really good contract for this year and the next 3 years. I still think he can be part of a really good hockey team. But it depends on what you could get for him. I wouldn't, for me, nothing would be off the table, right? Carter Hart, obviously, you want to keep moving forward. But he's a very good young goalie. Would I take him over like the Russians on the Rangers or the Islanders? I don't know. Probably not.
What about Carter Hart for Leon Draisaitl? Send him back home when we get.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think that you would definitely make that move, but I don't think that the Oilers are going to be making that move.
They might not make the playoffs this year.
I know
they don't have goaltending.
It's true. Cam from the defense.
I don't want to do that. Don't get me wrong. When people are going to attack me,
Cam York.
The value of it.
I agree about Cam York. He's looked really good since coming up. I mean, he's the guy who's going to be running the top power play unit. I wish he had a better shot, but he's a really good passer. He's a good skater. I think he'll.
But Dan, he has a decent wrist shot, and I think that for whatever it's worth, sometimes I think we wind up too much and just blast it, and you give that's an extra 2 seconds for everybody to get prepared. So that wrister,
right. And he can
that
work
wrister, and I think you saw that with JVR. He took the other night when he scored coming up the ice when he stripped and actually looked like somebody had put a rocket up his ass. He had a burst of speed there, and he scored kind of alone on that wrister. That's just to show you that a good wrister, sometimes you'll take these goaltenders by surprise, and I think that's what Cam York has too.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I like Egor Zamula. I think that he's got a lot of passion and heart the way that he plays, and so I want to see what he's got to give.
But you trade him now. I mean, you would if somebody comes along and wants him as part of
the
package.
Yeah, but again, I would trade anyone on this team, right? Okay. So you're saying who I'd like to move forward with. I'm assuming that we can't get Connor McDavid for Joel Farabee,
no,
so
sure.
I'd like to keep Joel Farabee. So I'm sort of viewing the question as who are the types of guys that I'd like to keep around that I think could maybe be part of a winning culture, which we don't have right now, and that's where Atkinson, Farabee. I do think Ivan Provorov could be part of a winning culture. Cam York, Zamula, Carter Hart. Those are kind of the guys that I think you want to build around. But there's just no marquee guy, which is disappointing.
There was some discussion about, I think, the Flyers going in, moving on from Provorov, and trading him and using some of those assets to go get Jeff Chikrin from Arizona, who kind of is going through some of the different struggles because they like some of the attributes he brings.
Jacob Chikrin. Jeff might be a little old for us to go after,
Jeff
but
is
you never know.
Father. Right. But that shows you I'm giving away my age there. I stand corrected. So Jacob Chikrin. And, I don't know enough about the player. I know he's a physical guy. He brings some offense. He's well-rounded. He's kind of going through the same struggles we saw with Provy. And it's just wondering whether they think he has a higher upside, because it feels like there's a clear ceiling with Provorov. He just seems like a complimentary first pairing defenseman, which is not a bad player. But if the Flyers defense is going to crater because one guy like Ryan Ellis is out of the lineup, something is fundamentally wrong. Now, I think that's structurally, and as far as coaching and systems and things like that, that's all part of the puzzle. That's all a piece of it. But it's just, we've seen this movie so many times. It makes me think that maybe some guys need a change. They will have good careers, but maybe they're not going to have them here. And the Flyers need to switch some pieces around. But I don't want to make a move just to make a move, on the other hand, either. So, Dan, I'll direct that towards you, and we'll get back to the show.
Honestly, I haven't seen Chikrin play enough to say if I would want him to be the centerpiece for an Ivan Provorov trade. From what I hear, he's been not very good this season. And my gut instinct tells me that Provorov is probably all in all a more valuable defenseman to have on your team than Chikrin. But again, I haven't seen Chikrin play a whole lot. So I think if I was going to move Provorov, I'd be more apt to try and do it in a package for, first round picks this year and next year and some prospects, because I really think that the only way to quickly get out of this tailspin it is going to be potentially by amassing a bunch of high first-round picks, and you sort of luck into maybe a couple of really, really talented kids.
Yeah, I mean, look at the Islanders. The Bruins had 3 shots to take Matthew Barzal, and regardless of what he's doing this year, I mean, that he's a talent. He's going to have a really good career. Look great in the Flyers uniform. There's no question. But they had 3 shots at him, and they didn't go for him, and the Islanders lucked out, and he fell right into their lap. So the Flyers need something like that to happen with a dynamic talent, because something has to change. I mean, their power play, to me, reflects a lot of the lack or dearth in their lineup of these kind of players. Chef?
Yeah, I'm just going to reiterate what Dan said. I wouldn't trade Provorov for Chikrin, for the simple fact that, I don't want to be. If we're talking about rebuilding, you're going to need those high picks, like Dan said. So if it's straight up for a player for player, I don't think that benefits us. Even if it is somebody that could be better down the line like Chikrin, I think you need to, like Dan said, amass picks if you're going to go that route. The good thing is, I guess we're seeing that Cam York can take the minutes. I mean, wasn't he the highest minutes in the game the other night?
I believe that was the case, but I mean,
yeah,
who
he
else
was like
do they have in the
23
lineup?
minutes or something, right? That's not bad. I mean, that's not bad for your fifth game that you're hanging in there. And it didn't look like he was slumping or anything. So if we're talking about minutes and stuff, if you can't get what you get, like a first rounders and maybe a second rounder for Provorov, I would stick it out for right now and say no. And hopefully you got two guys who can really eat up a lot of minutes. That's your worst case scenario, and play half decent. I mean, he hasn't been horrible, but he hasn't, like Dan said, blossomed into that first pairing guy that you wanted him to be.
Well, I think with Provorov, it's either at this point. I mean, how many times do you have to see it to learn the lesson? You know, with him, it's either you put him with somebody like Ryan Ellis, or you stick him on a second pair, and that's the guy who he is. He's not, he's not the guy who we wanted him to be in 2015. It doesn't make him a bad player.
It's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that assumption and that evaluation of the player. It's just maybe like we all said. I think Dan said it on like a show 6 months ago. He questioned his IQ, whether his hockey IQ was really as good as we thought. And okay, maybe it's not. And that's not an evil thing to say. That could just be very realistic.
What's it we have to be at this point? I mean, this is the worst era of Flyers hockey in my lifetime. People know I've been following this team 5+ decades. So it's just something has to give.
That's saying a lot.
Yeah, it's bad because you
think it's the worst in 5 decades?
Oh yeah, absolutely. This 10-year period is absolute shit.
Considering, even like in the early 80s, there were players that had caliber that you were excited about. And you were watching. I remember this as a kid.
They had Markel. They traded Ken. Look, all right, let's do a little history lesson here. You won't get this any other podcast. Now, you won't. You had the holdovers from the Cup teams in mid 70s that kind of rallied around guys like Ben Wilson, Bob Daly, and of course the Rat Ken Linsman. And they had all these injured defensemen, and somehow they figured out a way to make it to the Stanley Cup final. But anyway, this aggravates me when I see how our defense just craters. But anyway, and they kind of became a different kind of team, went to the final versus the Islanders in 80, and that kind of fell apart. And they really needed a defenseman because Daly ended up getting hurt in Buffalo. And they kind of remade themselves again in the 80s. And just when they were going to do a full kind of retool with young players in 84, 85 season, they emerged with all these young guys because they did a great job of drafting and developing. Of course, there's a serendipity with that. But when you have core pieces like Mark Howe, who ended up being a Hall of Fame player, and all these other guys like Tim Kerr and Zezel and Propp was a lone holdover from the 1980 Stanley Cup final team. And they ran from like 85 to 89 and had a nice 4-year run. Okay. But, the 90s were empty until Lindros got here. And then they still found a way to carry that momentum into the early 2000s until they came into the Carter Richards era. Of course, had one really horrible year in 2007. But then they cranked it back up, went to the final in 2010. And really, the whole era of Flyers hockey that I'm familiar with ended in 2012. Everything else since then has been crap, going nowhere. And they waved the white flag, Ed Snyder, and hand the reins over to Hextall, and it's just shit. And I can't stand watching it. And people will, these pundits have been watching the team 20, 30 years and say, well, it can take 5 years to rebuild and all that. Just get me a star or 2 or 3, build up. And people will bring up Edmonton and all. But, we already have a goalie. Hopefully he can make his way mentally. We don't have to see his mental coach up to 3 times a week. instead of once every week, whatever he does. He can make it through that period, that transition. But they have to go and swing for the fences with some of these players. And we've seen the Flyers go for players. They passed on Caulfield, which I think is a mistake. I like Cam York, but I would have rather seen them go for Caulfield. But the next year they go for Tyson Forster, and a lot of people didn't think they would do that. So it looks like this particular regime is willing to take a little chance in some cases. But they need speed, they need energy, and they're going to have to pick a core of players and maybe make painful decisions. And one more thing before we move on to the cultural thing, because at the end of the day, that's what separates the Flyers from other teams that have been able to shift over a decade-long period, like the Penguins, like the Bruins, because of the core of what's coming from the top down in terms of culture, identity, what it's like to be a Flyer, beyond some sloganeering like being an effing Flyer, which meant nothing. AV wasn't even part of our organization. What would he know? But anyway, the last thing is they really do have to make a decision about some of these players. And I think when someone brought up trading Provorov, they were really talking about trading Provorov to get into position to get a better pick, and then taking some of his assets and in a separate deal, maybe to go after Chychrun. So just to properly present that. But we got to talk, Dan, about the cultural issues that came up in 3 different articles. Bill Meltzer had a series of tweets where he was just kind of passing along what Mike Bio said about their compete in the Pittsburgh game, about kind of this thing where here we go again. Oh, woe is me. And how he doesn't think they went down swinging in that game. And of course they were down, but the Flyers used to be scrappy when they were underhanded. And if they would take a game like that, and maybe they would be losing 4-3 and they would lose 5-3 on an empty net goal. They didn't just fall over and just die. And we've seen that time and again in this era. And I think it was Charlie O'Connor that made a really good point in an article we were talking about on Twitter, that what Hextall tried to avoid is something he actually fed into. And that was this cultural malaise that set in because the players know how good their teammates are versus the other guys. And if they feel like they only have a certain level, a certain ceiling, they're already beaten before they even get on the ice, at least mentally. Dan?
Yeah, so a couple things. First off, on that line, I think that the most important article that has been written on the Flyers this year was written today by Charlie O'Connor. And the subject line of the article is "Hopelessness has infected Flyers world and it ain't pretty." And he kind of goes through where we are, from the front office to the coaches, to the players, to the fans. It's just a really good article. He was very thoughtful. I mean, he probably got into some things that a lot of reporters wouldn't get into, about how fans are reacting to things on Twitter, and some of the Ed Snyder stuff, which I don't know if we'll get into that or not, about how the team didn't tweet anything out about his birthday, which I'm sort of on the fence if it was a big deal or not. But what you just mentioned, I thought was the most interesting part of Charlie's article. I want to read this part. It was section 5 of his article. His articles are always so long. Was another theory to explain the hopelessness problem. And it was basically talking about, how Hextall's primary reason as to why he chose to go with the stay semi-competitive while rebuild path instead of a scorched earth teardown was driven by the importance of culture in his mind, that he thought that turning a team into an intentional loser for many seasons would have a negative impact on the attitudes of players. Charlie says, "I wonder if that strategy backfired. I wonder if by fostering an environment where the team was good enough to stay in contention, but flawed enough that the rug would ultimately be pulled out from under everyone before real success could actually be achieved, if too many players came to expect the worst in key situations. An entire era of Flyers hockey became defined by the brass ring being just out of reach. And maybe there are only so many times it can be pulled away before such a result starts to feel inevitable all of the time." I thought that was really interesting. And it's kind of what you were just talking about.
Yeah.
And I do wonder if that has something to do with it, where if you're just sort of on this one level for so long and you don't get, Provorov, when he came up, everyone was excited and Konechny too, but none of these guys really got to a level where you're like, we're going to go out there and we're going to win because we've got this guy on our team. Now, Carter Hart, you could argue can certainly be like that. But I thought it was a really interesting point. And I also wanted to bring up another cultural thing, which had to do with Charlie, which was Justin Braun, I think, was it over the weekend or late last week, was doing a press availability. And Charlie asked Justin Braun, they were talking about confidence and how you build confidence. And Braun's played on some good Sharks teams with Brent Burns and Joe Thornton and Pavelski. And Charlie asked him, he said, Justin, following up on confidence and having the ability to shake off bad things that happen in games, you were on some good Sharks teams. How was that confidence developed? Were there vocal leaders or was it lead by example? And Braun responded, we had a little bit of both. Thornton did a really good job holding guys accountable. Then there were guys like Pavelski that would just go out there and get the job done. But we had that culture for a long time when I showed up. We were going to be tough to play against at home. You had to be ready to go every night or you would hear it from the coach or from guys. The accountability was good there. And he basically said, you're not going to lose that night when we're at home. And he was basically insinuating that isn't the situation with the Flyers, that they don't really have that right now. And it was sort of interesting from a number of perspectives. One is, okay, well, Braun, you're a veteran, so shouldn't you be one of the guys doing this? But you could sort of, if you watch the interview, you could tell from Braun's mannerisms that he was very uncomfortable. He kept hemming and hawing. And there's clearly problems with the leaders on this team for, not motivating guys or something is not right. And it's, the culture is just, it's really bad right now from top to bottom. And it's just creating a really bad situation. And I just, I'm not sure how you move on from it.
Well, Braun was the guy that talked about these things a little bit last year, Jeff. He was the one that came out and said that he's never been on a team that just seemed to fall apart the way they did last year. And that's kind of what they're devolving into this year.
Yeah. If we're talking about lead by example, I guess he kind of does that. He shows up every game. He's kind of been like that silent steady back there. And, when they needed him to play with Provorov, he stepped up for a while and played with Provorov. He elevated his game. It wasn't going to sustain a whole season, but he did it. And then when you needed somebody for Cam York to rely on and mentor, he's been there for that. So I guess from if you're talking about lead by example, Braun's probably been there. And I think you can hear the frustration in his voice when he's doing these press conferences, and they're throwing him out there because he's been one of the more consistent players on the team. And, hopefully they'll ask him softer questions, but it's good that they're trying to call it out and trying to figure out what's going on. I also looked up and down the lineup there, and I don't know how vocal. We know how vocal Kevin Hayes can be, and we hear it with all of his about him, with trying to psych everybody up. But what's he doing during a game? That's before the game. Is it goofiness at this point, or is it really getting people fired up? What is Cam Atkinson doing? What is all these other veteran leaders on this team that we kind of brought in to solve this problem almost, and it seems like it's still getting out of control.
Well, I think Giroux is kind of that lead by example guy. Braun is that kind of player. I think Atkinson probably is that kind of guy. And they haven't really had a Martinet, if you will, a disciplinarian as a player since Pronger.
Yeah.
Really. And sometimes that is what you kind of need. And this is why a lot of people are saying, well, we're going if Yo's not going to be the guy next year, we're going to do another retool/rebuild. Let other people get into the semantics of where the dividing line is. A lot of people want to bring in a guy like John Tortorella, because they know there'll be at least one guy who demands accountability and won't take any crap. But I just don't know if the game hasn't passed John by. And I don't know if he's nothing more than another interim coach. Although I tell you one thing. I have heard from a couple people, including Jason Bertitas today. A, he's interested still in coaching. And B, guys generally do, even if it is in hindsight, really appreciate what he's done for their careers. But I don't know if I want to go there, Dan. I just that it if you can't get the player, doesn't this accountability is what we're asking for have to start somewhere?
Yeah, and Tortorella has been in the news recently because there was his comments about that incredible play from Trevor Zegras in the Ducks game behind the net, where he kind of was behind the net. He flipped the puck over the net, and Sonny Milano batted it out of midair into the net. And Tortorella, kind of was talking about how, I don't know about these plays. Not sure there's really a place in hockey for this. If you would have done this in the old days, you would have gotten knocked on your ass. And I'm not sure we need to go back to that kind of like that mentality. But it would be interesting to see what a guy like Tortorella would do here. I'm not sure if that fits in with, with the kind of rebuild that I'd want to do, just because you'd bring in Tortorella because you're going to try and get the most out of your players for a few years. And, I'm not sure he's the best at, a long-term scenario with a team. He sort of comes in and it's scorched earth.
Yeah. But would that instill a culture that they haven't had for almost a decade, that they've lost with Pronger? Because I guess at the end of the day, for me, the bottom line is, since Pronger left, they have had a problem showing up for games and doing this and doing that. And it just hasn't been, they say Wayne Simmons was somewhat that guy, but I think that's a problem. I think if they don't solve one problem, you can have all the talent. I mean, look at Edmonton. I think people miss the boat. How was Columbus able to stay afloat and competitive all those years? Guys would leave year in, year out. I'm even talking about pre-Tortorella. I'm just saying that there is a certain kind of spine, a backbone that they don't have. And Bill Meltzer went into it, Dan, when he talked about handling adversity. And that, to me, that goes right to it. And he talked about a tale of two teams between the Penguins and how, you got Crosby, Malkin, and that's the easy answer. But the fact is, both of those guys have missed considerable amount of time. Yeah. They have really been depleted as a roster with COVID and injuries, and have older guys, and yet they always hold it together. Kudos to Mike Sullivan and his staff. And he's a
great coach.
What they've been able to put together. I think he's rhymes with brick, with P. But he's a damn good coach, and they never fall apart. And talk about next man up. They actually execute that and have been doing that on and off. They've had some dips with that guy Johnson, but I mean, effectively since 2007 up until today.
Yeah. Well, see, I think in regards to Torts, he's one of those coaches that keeps having a declining shelf life. I mean, if you look at his career, it's like 1 year less everywhere he goes. It's 1 year. It's like, stale fish on a shelf kind of thing. I'm sure he could change a little bit of culture for a little bit of while, but then it turns to resentment. And this younger crew that's coming up, that's not the way, I don't think that way you can handle kids anymore. But there's also be said about accountability, and I think you can reach that in different ways. And I'm sure if you look around the league, you see other coaches, like you said, Sullivan. I loved him when he was a Shark, number 47, way back when, But if you're looking at coaches like him, I would say Brendan Moore, for example. I mean, they seem to instill accountability. Yeah, and I think if you're getting that from your coach, but do you hear Brendan Moore being like the hard ass that Tortorella was, or some of these older coaches were? No,
he can be in his way though.
In his way, but not like that. Like you said, silent P. Rick. So that kind of thing. So that's the way I see it. So
yeah, I really don't know what to say in that regard. other than, there seems like, Bill Meltzer said, he seemed to have a complete commitment to structure of what they're trying to do. So that seems to be missing from the Flyers. And I'd say that structure and the commitment to that has also been present with the Bruins as well. There is another team that, unlike the Flyers, has been able to essentially keep it together. I think they missed the playoffs that 1 year when they moved on from Julian and Cassidy took over. It was one of those years. But other than that, the Bruins and the Penguins have been able to really keep it together. And I think at the end of the day, while only one team can win the cup, you have to be more competitive. And the Flyers are always competitive. They were competitive in the offseason, trying to get players. All of a sudden, this isn't a destination people want to go to. I think, you can put the cart before the horse. What came first? Did the Flyers organization fall down, and then the team fell down, and then the performance on the ice didn't attract the players? I don't know. But they have to find a way, a catalyst for changing it, whether it's behind the bench, whether it's a new executive, or whether it's a player on the ice. Because right now, it's a mess. Dan?
Yeah, I wonder if, and I don't, again, Rick Tocchet, is a guy that people have talked about, and maybe he's got that Flyers mentality, and I'm guessing that he would come in and hold guys accountable. He probably didn't get much of a chance in his first go around there in Arizona with a team that just was not all that good. So, he might be an interesting guy to look at. A lot of people are asking if they think that Chuck Fletcher is the GM that could kind of lead this team through a rebuild. And then I've said on this show before that, I don't necessarily see a reason that he couldn't. He hasn't proven to me that he couldn't. And so I'd be, fine with kind of moving forward with him. I think that what happens the rest of the year is really going to be important. When are they going to try and see if Claude Giroux will waive his no-move clause? Maybe they already have and they have the answer. But when are they going to try and move him? When are they going to try and move some of these other guys? It came out today that Sean Couturier is not recovering all that well from his injury, or at least they said that he's not close to playing, not this week, certainly. At what point do you just sort of shut down Couturier, shut down Kevin Hayes, shut down Ryan Ellis for the rest of the year and just say, you know what, these guys are on long contracts. We need you guys to be healthy moving forward. And it's just not going to happen this year. Now, I highly doubt that happens. They're hockey players. I'm sure Hayes will probably keep playing through whatever he's got, and Couturier will come back when he can. But, I would look at shutting some of these guys down because it will also probably help the draft position for this year. So,
that's the thing. I don't know what's going to happen. But they only have played 35 games. So even if they have trouble completing the schedule and say they have a 70-game slate, which is possible, I think they're going to play more than that. They have almost no shot of catching a team like the Bruins. I mean, the Flyers are minus 29 in goal differential. They're playing Carolina on tomorrow night. And I think are they plus? What did I see? Plus 42 or something? Yeah, they're plus 42. So quick math: 71 goal differential. Distance between the two teams. I mean, it's light years. It is light years between the depth and talent and speed. That took a very long time. Ron Francis really put the seeds in the ground to germinate and grow with that bunch. But they have made some critical decisions that worked out well for them. But the Flyers are in no position at all to catch up to a team like Carolina. And for the long term and in the short term, I don't see them, barring a return to health to all these guys that we're talking about. And apparently Giroux, Giroux, Konechny, and Sanheim is back from the COVID list, and Provy is eligible, but Provy, Giroux, and Konechny are still not getting a negative test. That could change for tomorrow. But they just lost. Who they lose? Braun. Braun is on the COVID list now. So, and then Patrick Brown has a lower body injury, so he's out. We're going to see more Jackson Cates and guys like that. So this is a cluster F, and I just don't see a way out. Reminds me of that song by nobody will know what it is. Missing Persons.
Oh God!
No Way Out.
Yeah.
Yes, going back to the '80s. Great drummer, Terry Roziel.
I will say this. I think Dan's got a valid point there. I mean, if you're going to tell me you're going to get a coach like Rick Tocchet and you're going to have him instill that flyerism and that accountability into this team and going forward, whether or not they, you can either play like a flyer or under a former flyer like that knows what it means and holds players accountable. If that's the case, then I'm fine. Shut them all down. Like you said, it'll only help the drafting. If Coots is hurt, sit him the rest of the season. Ellis is hurt, sit him the rest of the season. They're not showing improvement now. Who cares? If you're going to say to me that, hey, come next season, we're going to have 3 really good picks, and we're going to have Tocchet as our coach, and these 3 players are gone, and we started the rebuild process, then I can accept that. If we're just going to flood around in mediocrity and less than mediocrity, before, at least under Hextall back then, with these players, it was mediocrity. They were the epitome of 500 team. This is like a pathetically below sub 500 team. I know COVID has a lot to do with it, but still, it's just not an enjoyable product to watch on TV.
Every team's had to deal with some level of this. So that's where the excuses are tough to take. Dan, let me ask you. If you're talking about a significant rebuild or retool or whatever, we started getting into this last week, and I really want to broach this. I want to hit this hard, and then we just got one other topic, and then I think we're going to call it a night. 8 years of Sean Couturier. You could say, on the one hand, that he plays the game the right way. His contract is not that bad as long as he's somewhat productive. And even if he's a second-line center, maybe he can instill some of the cultural aspects that we've been missing. On the other hand, I'm thinking, well, he's been here all that time. We still have had those problems. He's slowing down, and he may be very attractive to some other teams that will be willing to eat some of those years that'll be less than, worthwhile. And I'm wondering if all these years that Coots was underpaid, is this like going to be an 8-year revenge tour for Sean Couturier? Not intentionally, but in actual practice, where we have this player and maybe he could be moved on for some other assets, because I don't think they're ever going to do anything with him in the lineup. And I think his contract is going to be less and less of a good value as time goes on.
I was thinking about this today when I think about Ron Hextall, in that his biggest when I look back at his regime, the biggest blunder for me was taking Nolan Patrick, right, in retrospect. Mm-hmm. Now I'm thinking to myself, when I'm 5 years from now, 10 years now, when I look back on Chuck Fletcher's regime, is it possible that the biggest blunder that he made will have been the Sean Couturier contract? Because I hope you're right that maybe if they need to, they could try and move him. But this past offseason, Couturier is going to be a free agent at the end of this season. And they made a conscious decision to sign him to an 8-year extension for $7.75 million a year, which is a team-friendly number compared to some other players in Couturier's league. However, there's some concerns with Couturier, which I've had all along, and I talked about them before we even signed him to the contract, which was, it seems like he's slowing down, and it seems like he's having more and more nagging injuries, knee injuries, various different injuries. And to me, the question was, how much longer is he going to be able to play even close to this level? And now we see what's happened this year. They signed him to this long contract, I think because Chuck Fletcher was thinking that this team could be a contender, and he wanted to make sure that he had his number one center locked up for the next few years, right? And the price he had to pay was he had to sign into an 8-year contract. However, now the question becomes, if you're going to do a rebuild, is Couturier a guy who you want there? Maybe because he can, lead the way for some young players. But if you're going to be trying to get top 5 picks in the draft, it's not going to help to have a guy like Couturier. And the flip side is, as you mentioned, the injuries are going to start piling up. To me, I find it almost impossible to think that someone's going to trade us for Sean Couturier with that contract left. I just don't. Especially with what's happened this year with the injuries. Maybe if he's having a really good year and the Flyers were still not playing well, but I don't know. You really think that someone's going to trade us for that contract?
Well, I mean, we were willing to take Ryan Ellis for our reasons.
Everybody has a price.
Yeah, but Ellis has got 5 more seasons left. And Couturier is going to have 8 more seasons left after this year. It's a heavy hit to take. I mean, maybe you get a team that would want to take him, but the question for me is, what are you going to be able to get? Because I don't know. What do you think we'd be able to get for him? Because to me, it's almost, the pendulum's almost swinging in the direction where you have to sweeten it for other people because there's so much term and money left.
Well, we saw what a player like Philip Deneau can do. Now, I'm not saying that these are totally comparable players, but I think part of putting a team together is not just adding up goal totals and things like that. It's having complementary pieces. These go teams that struggle when they have to play against a team that has superior structure. If you throw a structure guy like Couturier into that lineup, as opposed to another offensive player, it can really make a difference. If he's on a team like Winnipeg, for example, and not that I want to send him there and, Sean, we love you. We don't want you to have to go to Winnipeg, although I'm sure it's a nice place, nice people, don't get me wrong. But if you put him on a team like that or Colorado, like if these teams come up empty, and a lot of it is because they're running into teams that have that structure, and it can't always be go. And you're running into that, and you need someone who has that ability to think the game at that level, who is a Selke level player and is always going to be a contender for that trophy. It should be for the next 4 or 5 years in the viewpoint of the team that might covet him. Then you could start making a case that we could get the flashy toy of a more offensive player. We could get the Nylander and they get the Couturier, for example, if you're using Toronto as an example. I'm not saying they already have Tavares and they have Matthews, don't get me wrong, but you know what I'm saying. So you get another team that needs that kind of player into the mix, much like I know it's going to be a silly example, when the Sixers traded George McGinnis and got Bobby Jones. Bobby Jones was defensive structure. And if you put it together, that's what they needed at that time. And in hockey, it can kind of work that way as well. So I'm not saying it's likely, but it's very possible that teams need that player to take that key face-off with 2 minutes left in the game. He's the guy you want out there, like Ryan O'Reilly became a difference maker for St. Louis. And it's not always being able to put points on the board. It's being able to get the momentum back, hold a lead, and maintain the scheme and the structure that the team needs. And that's been, an issue for a lot of teams that flame out in the playoffs.
Yeah, but most definitely. I get what you're saying. I just don't know how many destinations. I mean, you mentioned Winnipeg. I don't know how many more destinations are really out there for a player of his like him, especially. I mean, I forget his street. He doesn't have a no movement clause or anything. So, right?
No, not now. It starts next year. So this would
starts
be a
next year.
Richard,
so
it would be a Carter Richards situation where we trade him before that kicks in. And I've been discussing that with some people, and it's not that, again, it's nothing against the player. It's like, where are the Flyers right now, and what is best for them to try and get them their trajectory back towards Stanley Cup contention, at the light at the end of the tunnel. It's just simply not there.
Am I getting it mixed up?
Yeah.
Am I getting it mixed up? Hayes has one kicking in, but that's like the following year, not next year.
Hayes is actually expiring with that. Okay. Hayes kicks after 4 years. It's done. I believe. Okay. Yeah, I believe that's.
I'm mixing stuff up, but which is fine. But I like I said, I just don't know how many markets are available out there to take. I mean, take a player like Couturier. I mean, I guess you can always say Arizona's one of them. That's always a dumping ground for a lot of people. But
it's not going to be a rebuilding situation more than likely. But
yeah,
it's just an idea. It's just a thought. All right. So listen, we expect there's going to be a lot of trade scuttlebutt with the Flyers, even if they have a little run. I think we all agree that even in a miracle situation when they make the playoffs, and which I don't think be quite a miracle just yet. It's unlikely in the unlikely category. I haven't checked Money Puck in terms of their odds. I'm sure they're down to basically squat. But they're not going anywhere. And you can't have a ceiling that clear for everyone, including the players in the locker room, to see. So that's the way I feel about it. I think we come to a consensus, at least in that regard. Dan, what about Cam York? Is he benefiting? I mean, he made some rookie mistakes on the 2-on-1 and things like that. Is he ready because of the structure in the NHL actually benefits his game better than some of the chaos in the AHL? And he should definitely get a look, especially after this whole Yandel playing streak thing is satisfied in a few more games.
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason Cam York should ever see another game in the AHL. I mean, you're right that he's the kind of player who maybe does better in the NHL than AHL, and we kind of surmised that. I mean, Cam York is, for better or for worse, is the kind of guy who, right now in his career, he keeps things very simple. He looks to make the simple pass, and if he's surrounded by players that can do more with the puck and will make themselves more available to receive passes, he's going to do better. And so in the NHL, that's going to be the case more so than in the AHL. I would like to see Cam York eventually become a little more confident and a little more aggressive than he's shown to this point in his professional career, because otherwise I'm not sure that he's going to reach his potential. I think that he's got a little bit of Quinn Hughes in him, and in terms of playmaking ability and juking and jiving around the offensive zone. And I think that'll come with time. Right now, he's more of he's smooth, he's fluid, he gets the puck, he finds a guy to give the puck to, it's off his stick. And I think that plays pretty well in the NHL these days. I'd like to see him, get a little more aggressive, but that's going to take time. But yeah, I don't think he should be back down in the AHL at all.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think the one thing when you get in the NHL and you want to stay, is some guys take some shortcuts and don't develop their game as much as they could if they took that time in the AHL. But I think the nature of his game is such that there's efficiency that's built in, and he actually gets. I think he's diminished by inefficiency, and that's just how I feel about it. Chef, any comments in that regard before we start winding down there?
No, I agree completely, and he should get his look, especially with another D-man going into a COVID protocol. So, I mean, there's no reason, like Dan said, there's no reason he should go back down.
I'll tell you one of the highlights of this season, it's really sad, is when Yandel breaks that record, he's just got to go. He's got to get out of the lineup. I'd rather watch Nick Seeler or Connaughton at this point. I mean, he's been a really good player, but he just – I heard Russ Cohen today. He just can't get there. He just doesn't have the foot speed. It's gone. Whatever he had just a few years ago, it's just not there anymore. So, yeah, he's a great guy and all that, but So that's c'est la vie. That's life. Okay, so tomorrow night the Flyers give up a 71 goal differential between them. They host the Carolina Hurricanes. That's all. Only 71 goals. And then they play at Boston. Good luck. Against the Bruins. Then they host the Rangers at 50 points and have come along very well. And there's a Sunday game, a Sunday off, I should say. I don't know if we're going to see you on the 16th. We might not. We'll play that by ear. and I'll just give the rest of the schedule until we do come back. The 17th, they're at the Island. That's a Monday night. Tuesday, the next night, they host Detroit. Thursday, they host Columbus Blue Jackets, and then they go to Buffalo on a Saturday night, the 22nd. And somewhere in there, we'll be talking to you and giving you updates. Look, the trade chatter is really going to start, so look at Freeman and guys like that. And just before we go and do the intros, social media coordinates, I promised last show that I would read our latest review on Apple. It's a 5-star review from somebody named HXJBBVHC. And you know I had to read this one. The Wise Man. It's about me. Isaiah is the Yoda of the Flyers podcast scene. Wise and constructive insight and analysis of the team with decades of history and Flyers hockey fandom to back it up. Definitely excited every time there's a new episode. Well, thank you, HXJBBVHC. We do appreciate it. And listen, if we get a bad one, we'll read that too. So if you rate and subscribe, it really does help us for the reasons I mentioned earlier. So I just thought, want to keep my promise, especially something that says something good about me for a change. So, Chef, let me start with you. Where can people find you on social media?
Yes, you can catch me at Chef to the Left B on Twitter, and I'm back poking around after being on the COVID list myself.
Yeah, glad to have you back from protocols. Dan, your social media coordinates.
Yeah, so fans can find me on Twitter at dsilver88. The 88 is for Eric Lindros, who we talked about a little bit today. We seem to be talking about him, more and more, some of the better days in Flyers hockey. But yeah, at dsilver88, throw me a follow, and let's see what happens this week in Flyers hockey.
Yeah, it's a soap opera as the hockey turns. Yeah, I'm Isaiah, ISAIAH _520 at Isaiah _ don't forget the _ 520 on Twitter. And with that, in the midst of some of these games, one of these games, we'll come back and shout at you with the latest and our opinions and all the information you want from the O&B Puckcast. So until then, everybody, take care.